Good morning, evening, or night, wherever you are. Welcome to WHAM today. Take a deep breath, clear your mind, and let's drift through the whispers of today's world, one quiet thought at a time. As we wrap up Thursday, 10th July, 2025, let's see what stories are unfolding around us. UNAIDS reports a concerning global trend. The criminalization of high-risk HIV groups is on the rise. This includes gay men and people who inject drugs. The number of countries criminalizing same-sex sexual activity and gender expression has increased for the first time in a decade. A UNAIDS agency report also suggests that the sudden withdrawal of US funding has caused a systemic shock to the global effort against AIDS and HIV, predicting millions more deaths by 2029 if this funding isn't replaced. Rescuers have located 4 more crew members from the ship Eternity Sea, which Yemen's Houthi rebels sank in the Red Sea. The US suspects Yemen rebels may be holding them. Turning to the United States, the Trump administration has sanctioned on Special Rapporteur Albanese over her reports on the war in Gaza. Secretary of State Marco Rubio reassured Southeast Asian nations of the U.S. commitment to the region during his first official visit to Asia, despite punitive tariffs imposed by President Donald Trump. Rubio, meeting with ASEAN foreign ministers in Malaysia, stated the U.S. has no intention of abandoning the region, days after Trump threatened severe tariffs if deals weren't made by August 1. He also hinted at a possible meeting with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi on the sidelines of the ASEAN meeting, their first in-person meeting since Rubio assumed his position in January, also holding the post of national security. Donald Trump stated, "The U.S. will impose a 35% tariff on imports from Canada starting August 1st, threatening to increase it if Canada retaliates." He also threatened blanket tariffs of 15% or 20% on most other trade partners, conveyed in a letter to Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney. Senator Dick Durbin has said leaked Justice Department messages appear to support claims that the Trump administration defied court orders regarding deportations. The U.S. is widening public benefit restrictions for undocumented immigrants, affecting access to 13 more federal programs, including an educational project for low-income children. UN Rapporteur Albanese rejected obscene sanctions for criticizing Israel, stating the move is retaliation for her pursuit of justice in Israel's Gaza war. She views the sanctions as not a sign of strength, but of guilt. House District Judge Joseph LaPlante in New Hampshire blocked President Donald Trump's executive order targeting birthright citizenship, responding to a motion by immigration rights groups in a class action lawsuit. Paramount Global, Disney, and Meta have settled lawsuits with Donald Trump for millions of dollars, leading to concern for the future of a free press. Meanwhile, in Australia, the political leader of the Central Tibetan Administration visited this week as Anthony Albanese heads to China. The Tibetan leader urged Albanese to request a visit to Tibet. The Victorian government is considering increased testing for elderly drivers after a 91-year-old woman lost control of her car in Wantina, South Melbourne, killing a female pedestrian and injuring 2 others near a playground. The Australian government is lobbying for the Murujuga cultural landscape in Western Australia to be added to the World Heritage List, securing the backing of at least 8 members of the 21-country World Heritage Committee. A 61-year-old Palestinian woman, Maha al-Masri, who arrived in Australia from Gaza, was detained by Australian Border Force officers after a pre-dawn raid in Sydney. She was reportedly told she failed a visa character check and was taken to a detention centre. A report recommends Australian universities lose government funding if they don't address attacks on Jewish students, and suggests screening potential immigrants for political affiliations to curb anti-Semitism. A man has been charged with racially abusing a high-profile basketball player via social media, marking a first for the sport in Australia. Two men who stole a 500 kk pallet of 63,000 limited edition Bluey coins from a Sydney warehouse in June 24 will spend more time in jail. Shifting focus to China, Taiwan debuted US Abrams tanks during live fire drills to boost public morale and highlight combat readiness amidst rising tensions with Beijing. This display coincided with China ramping up its own military signaling across the Taiwan Strait, with state broadcaster CCTV airing footage of amphibious assault and reconnaissance drills. A former central bank official suggested the yuan could become a safe haven currency, advocating for capital control flexibility and increased foreign participation. In Slovakia, the Rubicon hip-hop festival in Bratislava, which was due to host Kanye West, was cancelled following public uproar over his song, glorifying Adolf Hitler. The cancellation came after several performers and partners withdrew. Finally, in Brazil, Donald Trump's first-term ally, then-President Jair Bolsonaro, is at the center of an escalating trade dispute rooted in years of political history. Israel's conflict with Hamas continues to intensify despite ceasefire talks, leading to a severe humanitarian crisis and overwhelming Gaza's medical facilities. An Israeli airstrike near a Gaza medical center resulted in at least 16 deaths, including 10 children. Gaza's few remaining hospitals are struggling to cope with the influx of casualties, further compounded by an airstrike near a facility run by an American aid organization. Hundreds have died near food distribution sites, which are largely operated by private American contractors. Following pressure from the European Union, Israel will permit increased aid into Gaza to address the dire humanitarian situation affecting Palestinians. However, Israel continues to prohibit independent access to Gaza for international journalists. An Israeli official has suggested a possible Gaza truce may be reached within 1 to 2 weeks. Regarding Iran, an Israeli official has stated that Iran still possesses enriched uranium at a processing site in Isfahan. The official also noted the possibility of Iran recovering uranium from a nuclear site previously targeted by the U.S., acknowledging the significant challenges involved in such an endeavor. The effective use of drones by both Israel and Ukraine against their respective adversaries has garnered the attention of the Pentagon, sparking interest in new technological advancements. In the United States, Mahmoud Khalil, a pro-Palestinian protest leader who organized student demonstrations against Israel's actions in Gaza, and was previously labeled a national security threat by the Trump administration, is suing Donald Trump for $20 million. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has criticized Francesca Albanese, a special rapporteur, for her call for international investigations into Americans and Israelis concerning the Gaza conflict. Finally, Dr. Victoria Rose, a British surgeon, has recounted her experiences working in Gaza's hospitals, detailing the treatment of traumatic injuries and the devastating impact of Israeli bombs on the civilian population. China's economic landscape is being closely monitored as semiconductor investment cools and first-half GDP data is assessed for potential fiscal stimulus needs amidst trade tensions with the United States. A challenging job market is causing anxiety among the Chinese workforce, exacerbated by layoffs and economic pressures from the ongoing trade war. In pursuit of resource security, China identified 38 new mineral reserves, including rubidium and gold, representing a 31% increase year-on-year. To restore the ecology of the Yangtze River, China demolished 300 dams and shut down most hydropower stations on a major tributary. The robotics sector is experiencing growth, with Shenzhen-based DexForce technology company raising several hundred million yuan. China unveiled production facilities for its fifth-generation fighters, including J-35 jets, indicating readiness for carrier-based catapult launches. The Chinese military newspaper cautioned against ethical issues with humanoid fighters, advocating for preemptive research. The Beijing Institute of Technology created the world's lightest insect brain controller, weighing 74 milligrams for use on bees. Over 60 weight loss drugs are undergoing clinical trials in China, positioning them to compete with Western counterparts. China is expected to strengthen its support for Iran to secure strategic interests in the Middle East, while balancing relationships with Arab countries and the Gulf Cooperation Council. Concerns are also growing about Chinese research ships studying seabeds. China's top diplomat has criticized its trade practices as unreasonable and immoral, urging Southeast Asian countries not to undermine their interests in tariff discussions with the United States. Turning to the United States, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is scheduled to meet with his Chinese counterpart, Wang Yi, to discuss trade, Taiwan, and Russia's war in Ukraine. President Trump warned Kazakhstan to strike trade deals or face tariffs, despite their deepening ties with China and limited trade with the US. Meanwhile, the European Union is striving to reduce its reliance on China, aiming to regain control over critical sectors like chemicals, pharmaceuticals, and biotech, due to weaponized supply chain concerns. The EU faces increasing pressure to address Beijing's dominance over rare earth supply chains, particularly leading up to the EU-China summit. In Arunachal Pradesh, Chief Minister Pema Khandu stated that the next Dalai Lama will come from a free democratic country, not from China. In Fiji, China donated approximately $44,600 to the newly installed chief of Fiji's Lao group. The United States is facing heightened tensions with Brazil after former President Donald Trump threatened a 50% tariff on Brazilian export. Trump cited Brazil's treatment of ex-President Jair Bolsonaro as the reason for the tariff, signaling a potential shift in trade policy. Brazil, in response, President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva promised to retaliate with equivalent tariffs on imports from the U.S., invoking the law of reciprocity. The country is developing a strategic response to protect its key industries. Analysts believe this tariff dispute could push Brazil closer to China, which already purchases more than twice the exports that the U.S. does. The U.S. receives around 12% of Brazil's exports, representing approximately 1% of Brazil's GDP. The BRICS nations have expressed concern about the potential global economic impact of indiscriminate tariffs and the increase in trade restrictions, in an indirect critique of U.S. policy. Japan has formally protested to China over increasingly risky encounters between Chinese fighter jets and Japanese military aircraft in the East China Sea. Tokyo cited instances where Chinese jets came dangerously close to Japan Air. Self-Defense Force, ASDF, surveillance aircraft over international waters with reported distances of 30 and 70 meters. Foreign Minister Takeshi Iwaya voiced these concerns to China's top diplomat, Wang Yi, during ASEAN meetings, also addressing Chinese military activities and rare earth policies. Japan, the US, and the Philippines have jointly reaffirmed the importance of navigation freedom in the East China Sea. Economically, Japan is attracting capital due to structural reforms in equities and rising fixed income rates. PIMCO describes this economic environment as a once-in-a-generation opportunity. However, Kirin Holdings is ending sales of Beaujolais Nouveau in Japan because of rising costs and shifting consumer tastes. In other news, General Yoshihide Yoshida of Japan and Admiral Kim Myung-soo of South Korea jointly inspected a guard of honor. A recent survey indicates more Japanese citizens plan to stay indoors during summer holidays due to extreme heat and high prices. The Japan Meteorological Agency predicts a 40% chance of La Nina in the autumn. China is facing pressure from Japan to cease flying fighter jets so close to Japanese military aircraft, following earlier accusations from Beijing that Japan was spying on Chinese military operations. A Chinese court is set to deliver a verdict in the case of a Japanese businessman working for Astellas Pharma who was indicted in August of the previous year. Details of the charges against him remain undisclosed. An original Hermes Birkin bag, designed by Jane Birkin, was sold to a Japanese bidder at auction for 8.6 million euros, $10.10 million, or $10 million, setting a new record for a handbag. Elsewhere, 2 American citizens were rescued from Mount Fuji before the official climbing season, leading to calls for stricter penalties for those who break hiking regulations. A street gang called the Lucifers in central Japan disbanded in a public ceremony at Atsuta police station. Blyhalf Dan Edwards will start for Wales against Japan in Kobe, according to interim head coach Matt Sherratt. Ukraine has arrested a Chinese father and son suspected of espionage targeting the Neptune anti-ship missile program, vital for Ukraine's defense against Russia. Kyiv accuses Beijing of aiding Russia's war efforts. Following Volodymyr Zelensky's meeting with us senators in Rome, where discussions focused on increased sanctions against Moscow and continued support for Kyiv, Russia, intensified missile and drone strikes. A Ukrainian intelligence officer whose unit orchestrated a surprise attack inside Russian territory last summer, was assassinated in Kyiv. The Kremlin maintains that the Ukraine peace process is ongoing, awaiting a signal from Kyiv regarding participation in a third round of negotiations. Secretary of State Marco Rubio indicated that the US and Russia have exchanged new proposals for Ukraine peace talks in Malaysia. President Trump stated the US will supply weapons to Ukraine via NATO, and that he would make a major statement on Russia on Monday. President Trump may be considering new economic sanctions against Russia, signaling a shift towards Europe's position on Ukraine. Amid growing dissatisfaction with President Vladimir Putin, United Kingdom, near Gravelines, France, an inflatable dinghy carrying approximately 20 individuals, presumed to be asylum seekers, was spotted preparing for a perilous journey to the UK, the passengers equipped with life jackets. A parliamentary report reveals mismanagement of private finance contracts, leading to substandard assets, including schools and hospitals, reverting to government control. This situation arises as the government champions private investment in projects outside London as a key component of its growth strategy. The UK's designation of Palestine Action as a terrorist group has ignited concerns regarding its potential impact on pro-Palestine protests and freedom of expression. A UK study revealed that minority ethnic children and those from disadvantaged backgrounds face a higher risk of mortality following admission to intensive care compared to their white and more affluent peers. United States. President Trump announced the U.S. would supply weapons to Ukraine through NATO, promising a major statement on Russia on Monday. He is reportedly considering new economic sanctions against Russia, a potential alignment with European views on Ukraine amid growing dissatisfaction, with President Vladimir Putin. Secretary of State Marco Rubio disclosed that the U.S. and Russia have recently exchanged proposals for Ukraine peace talks in Malaysia. Russia. The Kremlin asserts that the Ukraine peace process is active, and that Russia is awaiting a signal from Kyiv regarding participation in a third round of discussions. Following Volodymyr Zelensky's discussions with the senators in Rome, focused on tougher sanctions and continued support for Ukraine, Russia escalated its missile and drone attacks. President Trump is said to be considering new economic sanctions against Russia, signaling a potential shift towards Europe's stance on Ukraine amid growing dissatisfaction with President Vladimir Putin. Secretary of State Marco Rubio revealed that the US and Russia have exchanged new proposals for Ukraine peace talks in Malaysia. China. In Ukraine, a Chinese father and son were arrested on suspicion of spying on the Neptune anti-ship missile program, which is critical to Ukraine's defense against Russia. This arrest comes amid accusations from Kyiv that Beijing is assisting Russia's war efforts. Russia's transport minister's death has sparked speculation about a repressive atmosphere for Kremlin elites, drawing parallels to Stalin's era. Against a backdrop of increased tensions stemming from Moscow's intensified attacks on Ukraine, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Malaysia during a summit, expressing Washington's discontent with the war and defending new U.S. tariff threats. Rubio later indicated that the U.S. and Russia shared new proposals for Ukraine peace negotiations. Ukraine faced a significant missile and drone assault on Kyiv, resulting in casualties and fires. This attack occurred a day after the war's most intense aerial bombardment, and just hours before a meeting between high-ranking American and Russian diplomats. Russia unleashed 18 missiles and approximately 400 drones on Ukraine, targeting Kyiv ahead of a conference in Rome where Kyiv received pledges of aid. There are reports of Russia's record drone attack in Kharkiv, Ukraine, alongside news of the Bayeux Tapestry's return. Key events from day 1233 of Russia's war on Ukraine are also being tracked. The United States, through Secretary of State Marco Rubio, engaged with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Malaysia during a Southeast Asian Nations Assembly, amid escalating tensions due to Moscow's intensified offensives in Ukraine. Rubio communicated Washington's concerns about the war and defended recently announced U.S. tariff imposition. Following the discussion, Rubio revealed that the U.S. and Russia exchanged novel concepts regarding prospective peace talks for Ukraine. Malaysia marked former Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad's 100th birthday, an event he humorously called quite frightening while showing no signs of retiring from public life. The United States approved the sale of up to 33 pre-owned F/A-18D Hornet fighter jets to Malaysia, aiming to bolster its air defenses, particularly in the South China Sea, and to enhance deterrence while maintaining a balanced relationship with China. RMAF Chief General Tan Sri Azhar Khan Goriman confirmed the approval. Amidst this, hikers were filmed descending Mount Kinabalu during heavy rainfall. In unrelated news, a Malaysian teenage couple, Sridavine Manthavan and Thanswari V. Devendran, both 19, were charged in Cyberjaya with the murder of a 20-year-old student and could face the death penalty if found guilty. Turning to the United States, Donald Trump nominated Nick Adams, a right-wing commentator and former Sydney councillor, to be the U.S. ambassador to Malaysia. Adams, who has described himself as an alpha male and is known to be a Hooters enthusiast, voiced his gratitude to Trump, stating that in your America all dreams come true. The nomination has raised concerns among diplomats and observers in Southeast Asia, who suggest that political allegiance may be prioritized over diplomatic qualifications. The United Kingdom and France have solidified a new agreement centered on addressing migration and bolstering security cooperation. A central tenet of the accord focuses on the return to France of migrants who undertake crossings of the English Channel in small vessels, a proposal lauded as potentially transformative. A pilot program operating on a one-in, one-out basis will also be initiated to manage channel crossing. Beyond migration concerns, both nations have expressed a mutual willingness to establish a joint peacekeeping coalition dedicated to supporting Ukraine. Recognizing their status as the sole nuclear powers within Europe, and permanent members of the UN Security Council, the UK and France have further pledged to enhance coordination of their respective nuclear deterrent capability. Canada faces a new 35% tariff imposed by US President Donald Trump, set to take effect on August 1. Trump has suggested the tariff could increase if Canada retaliates. The US president cited Canada's alleged role in the US fentanyl crisis as justification for the tariff. In other news, coal, the last surviving cat in Canada's Parliament Hill cat colony, has died. The cat colony was a popular tourist attraction for decades, offering solace to tourists and locals alike. Separately, local police are investigating a shooting at comedian Kapil Sharma's restaurant in Surrey, though no injuries were reported, raising concerns about public safety in the area. An Indian student pilot, Srihari Sukesh, died in a mid-air collision with a Canadian youth pilot. Both pilots were killed in the tragic accident. United States. The United States, under President Donald Trump, has imposed a 35% tariff on Canada, effective August 1. Trump is also considering tariffs of 15-20% on other trading partners. He has threatened to increase the tariff on Canada if the country retaliates against the initial levy. The U.S. president cited Canada's alleged role in the U.S. fentanyl crisis as the reason for the tariff. Bangladesh is facing renewed political tensions as ousted leader Sheikh Hasina has been formally charged with crimes against humanity. The charges relate to her alleged role in ordering a deadly crackdown on anti-government protests. These protests resulted in over 1,400 deaths. Hasina fled to India after her Awami League government was toppled last year. She remains in hiding. Turning to India, a British F-35B fighter jet remains grounded at an Indian airport. The aircraft is experiencing a technical issue. It has been there for nearly a month. Meanwhile, SAIC Motor Corp, a Chinese carmaker, is adjusting its strategy in India. It is scaling back its ambitions and transferring more control to its local partner. This shift is due to increasing political and regulatory pressure. Additionally, a call for India to establish a strategic Bitcoin reserve has sparked debate. Pradeep Bhandari, a member of the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party, made the suggestion. Digital finance experts are discussing its feasibility. In the Red Sea, a maritime tragedy continues to unfold. 4 seafarers were rescued after spending over 48 hours in the water. They were victims of the sinking of the Greek ship Eternity. Sea Houthi militants sunk the ship. The attack resulted in at least 4 deaths. The search continues for the remaining crew members. Ukraine's Mr. Metz, addressing an international audience in Rome, called upon President Donald Trump and Washington, D.C. to stand united with European nations in support of Ukraine, emphasizing their shared stake in a secure and stable global political landscape. Despite the constant threat of nighttime attacks, Kyiv continues to thrive, mirroring the energy and activity of any major European capital. Turning to the European Union, the Data Protection Commission has initiated an inquiry into TikTok, focusing on the platform's handling of user data transfers to China and the potential breaches of privacy this might entail. Meanwhile, Milan's La Scala is tightening its dress code, banning items such as flip-flops and tank tops, aligning with efforts by other European opera houses to broaden their appeal. In the latest from the United States, sanctions have been levied against Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur for the West Bank and Gaza, following a failed attempt to oust her from her role. South Korea is currently navigating a series of complex legal and social challenges. Former President Yoon Suk-yeol has been re-detained. This follows a court-approved arrest warrant related to his declaration of martial law last year. His legal team has strongly condemned the detention, labeling it disproportionate. Separately, Tile, a former member of the K-pop group NCT, was sentenced to 3 years in prison. He was convicted of raping a tourist, a case that has elicited widespread public condemnation. Adding to the nation's woes, a South Korean restaurant is under scrutiny for potential violations of food safety regulations. The restaurant allegedly served around 12,000 dishes containing ants, claiming it was to enhance the dish's acidity. Iran's activities are raising significant concerns in the UK, where a parliamentary committee has likened Iran's intimidation tactics, including physical threats and assassinations against Iranian dissidents, to those employed by Russia. The UK is a high-priority target for Iranian cyber attacks, second only to the US and Saudi Arabia. An official report further warned that Iran is actively targeting dissidents and gathering intelligence on Jewish and Israeli targets within Britain. These assessments coincide with expert evaluations regarding the potential timeline for Iran to rebuild its nuclear program, should the US and Israel launch strikes against its nuclear facilities. Nepal is grappling with the aftermath of devastating flash floods that have claimed 9 lives and left numerous individuals stranded. Authorities suspect a glacial lake outburst near the Nepal-China border as the source of these unexpected floods. The absence of rainfall during the event has heightened anxieties regarding glacial lake outburst floods, GLOFs, underscoring the critical requirement for enhanced information exchange protocols, especially in light of a previous fatal flood incident along the same border region. United States immigration. Officials supported by National Guard troops raided Glass House Farms cannabis operations in Southern California. The raids led to clashes between immigration and customs enforcement agents and protesters, who were dispersed with chemical munitions. Turning to Bangladesh, a minority religious group reported 258 communal attacks in the first 6 months of 2025. The reported incidents included 20 rapes and 59 attacks on religious sites. The UNAIDS report highlights a looming global health crisis, precipitated by the suspension of $4 billion in U.S. funding for the global HIV response. This funding, initially pledged for 2025 under the Trump administration, is crucial for maintaining progress against the virus. Low-income countries, already facing resource constraints, are struggling to fill this significant financial void. The UN forecasts dire consequences if the shortfall persists, estimating that it could result in 6 million additional HIV infections and 4 million preventable deaths by 2029. Switching to entertainment news, China's animated film, Ne Zha 2, a global box office success with $220 billion in earnings, is set for release in the United States in August. The English-dubbed version will feature the voice talent of Michelle Yeoh, potentially broadening the film's appeal to a Western audience. Italy and Ukraine's leaders opened a conference in Italy, emphasizing private investment for Ukraine's reconstruction, amid ongoing Russian attacks. Meanwhile, in Italy's Po Delta, farmers are battling flamingos, decimating risotto rice crop. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen recently survived a confidence vote. The vote was triggered by allegations she misused EU funds. Accusations also included interfering in elections in both Germany and Romania. Germany has recently reinstated border checks with Poland. These checks are disrupting the daily routines of many residents near the border. These residents had become accustomed to the border's open state. Fiji recently celebrated the installation of a new chief amidst a quiet gathering, punctuated by the sounds of nature. Adding to the nation's fervor, the sons of a former Fiji captain and his teammate have been chosen for the national team facing Scotland. Separately, Fiji's health educators are growing increasingly concerned about medical students using AI to complete assignments. A rare tuber in Fiji displays an intriguing symbiotic relationship, nurturing separate spaces for different ant colonies. Thailand's path to legalizing casinos is facing challenges. The government has withdrawn key legislation due to rising political instability. In a parallel move, Thailand is preparing to reverse its cannabis decriminalization. Most cannabis shops will need to become licensed medical clinics. These clinics must have physicians on staff. Yemen's Houthi rebels have escalated their attacks on Red Sea shipping, leading to vessel sinkings and casualties. One recent incident involved the Liberian-flagged bulk carrier Eternity Sea, which was attacked and sunk. 10 crew members were rescued from the Eternity Sea. The UK is preparing for another heat wave this weekend. Record-breaking temperatures could hit Scotland and most of England. Eastern Scotland and eastern Northern Ireland are forecast to meet the heat wave criteria. Indonesia is seeing innovative climate action from Rubicon, a startup focused on capturing refrigerants to lessen their environmental impact. In other news, a young Indonesian boy's boat dancing videos have gone viral, leading to his appointment as a local tourism ambassador. South Africa finds itself at the center of an international debate as the European Court of Human Rights, ECHR, has ruled that Caster Semenya, the two-time Olympic gold medalist, was not given a fair trial. This ruling pertains to Semenya's challenge against regulations mandating testosterone level reduction for female athletes. Following this decision, Semenya is now championing enhanced athlete rights. Liberia found itself at the center of controversy after U.S. President Donald Trump praised President Joseph Bokai's English proficiency. This was met with confusion and offense, as English is Liberia's official language. The remark stirred considerable negative reaction among Liberians. El Salvador faces ongoing challenges due to deportation policies that began during the Trump administration. President Nayib Bukele's administration has responded by imprisoning over 200 deportees, a move that has been met with both support and criticism. This action reflects a broader effort to address gang-related issues and maintain public order, but also raises concerns about human rights and due process for those being deported. The United States has sanctioned Francesca Albanese, the United Nations Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in the occupied Palestinian territories, provoking international condemnation. Pakistan mourns the loss of 9 bus passengers, tragically kidnapped and killed by armed men, as confirmed by provincial government spokesman Shahid Rind. In Belize, archaeologists have made a significant discovery, unearthing the tomb of a Maya ruler. The tomb contained a rare mosaic death mask. The mask was meticulously crafted from jadite. Accompanying the mask were uniquely designed vessels. These vessels were shaped to resemble various animals, offering insights into Maya beliefs. Greece recently received over 500 migrants at the port of Lavria. These individuals were intercepted near Crete. Greek authorities transferred them to alleviate pressure on the island. This followed a surge in migrant arrivals from Libya. North Korea is facing a lawsuit from defector Choi Min-kyung, who alleges torture and sexual violence. She claims these abuses occurred in North Korean detention facilities. Choi Min-kyung is seeking $37,000 in damages in the South Korean court. She has also filed a criminal complaint accusing Kim Jong-un of crimes against humanity. Argentina is set to see former President Alberto Fernandez face trial on corruption charges, accused of using a broker married to his personal secretary to improperly secure government insurance policies. Turning to Greece, authorities in Athens have announced a new policy of arresting individuals entering the country from North Africa without prior authorization, regardless of their asylum claim. In Mongolia, Emperor Naruhito of Japan visited the Gandantik Chinlen Monastery, a significant temple influenced by Tibetan Buddhism, and also toured a Mongolian school offering Japanese-style education. Meanwhile, New Zealand has declared a state of emergency for the northern part of its North Island and the Tasman region due to severe weather conditions, including heavy rain and strong winds, with electrical storms anticipated in Auckland. Papua New Guinea's governor of East Sepik Province has initiated a partnership with a local pharmacy to enhance the availability and accessibility of essential drugs and medicines. Analysts are advising the Philippines to intensify negotiations regarding a potential 20% tariff imposed by the United States, underscoring the pressure from the US to reduce its deficit amidst competition with China. In Sudan, the deputy prosecutor of the Hague Court, Najat Shamim Khan, described the civil war, particularly in Darfur, as reaching an intolerable state, citing evidence of crimes against humanity. Across the region in Syria, firefighters in Damascus, who once fought on opposing sides of the civil war, are attempting to rebuild trust and cooperation within their fire station, which was previously divided by a makeshift wall. Turkey has seen hundreds of individuals perceived as opponents of President Erdogan detained in what is described as a corruption crackdown, specifically targeting municipalities governed by the Republican People's Party. The United States is seeing several of the world's poorest countries, including Somalia, Dr. Congo, and Yemen, reportedly spending millions on lobbyists with ties to Donald Trump in an effort to offset cuts to U.S. foreign aid, allegedly entering into agreements and bartering mineral resources in exchange for aid or military support. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has suggested that Asian nations may receive more favorable tariff rates compared to other regions during ASEAN talks. Following the detection of screwworm, Mexico's Claudia Sheinbaum criticized the U.S. response as exaggerated after the U.S. closed ports of entry to Mexican cattle. Finally, in the European Union, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen survived a vote of no confidence. And that's a wrap for today's news, because even headlines need a nap. Stay curious, stay kind, and let the noise fade as you find your quiet. Take care, stay awesome, and I'll see you next time on WHAM Today.